Hello, hello. Welcome back, y'all, to Busboys and Poets Books Presents. And tonight we are joined by two very special guests for a very special book. And I'm just going to pick this right up here. So tonight we are so very honored to, I'm so sorry, y'all. I'm trying to make sure we get it in good context here. We are so honored to be joined by the authors and the editor for Black Love Matters. Real talk on romance, being seen, and happily ever afters. And so tonight we are joined by Jessica Pride, who, as well as being an author and contributing editor for Book Riot, where she's the co-host of When in Romance podcast and writes about bookish things of all kinds. She was, in fact, a librarian at some point, having earned her MLIS at San Jose University, and I think she might still be a public librarian at the public library system in southern Arizona, where she currently resides with her husband and an ever-growing collection of Funko Pops. Relatable content. Black Love Matters is her very first book. In addition, we have got Piper Hughley, who seeks to make inroads in the publication of historical romance by featuring African American Christian characters. And so The Lawyer's Luck and Preacher's Promise were the first books in her Home to Milford College series. And, excuse me, the first book, I'm so sorry, y'all. Tonight is quite the night. The first three books in the Migrations of Heart series, which follows the loves and lives of African American sisters during the America's greatest internal migration, the Great Migration, in the first part of the 20th century, was published by Samhain Publishing, and she actually has a new book coming out this June, and we're surely going to hear more about that very soon. And without further ado, I'm going to bring on Jessica and Piper. Good evening, y'all.
Hello.
And I'm going to leave you all to get started without me. Bye.
Bye. Hey,
Thank you,
Jessica.
Lori. Hello. How are you this? I guess for you it's evening. It's still early mid-afternoon for me.
Oh, that's right. You have a time difference. Yeah. Technically, it's evening for me.
Yeah, it would be a little later, but once daylight savings changes, Arizona ends up on Pacific time, so I am now 3 hours behind everyone.
That's right. Arizona's weird like that.
I always have to think about, because my mother, well, most of my family still lives in DC, so I just have to think about, is it 7 o'clock or 8 o'clock right now when I'm thinking to call my mother?
Confusing.
Anyway, thank you so much for joining me in this conversation. I'm super excited to chat with you today about Black Love Matters and Black romance and other things that we might touch upon in our conversation. And those of you who are watching, if you have questions, we will be able to answer them later on. So please ask questions because we like to know that you're there.
Absolutely. Don't leave us hanging on the edge of a cliff.
Absolutely.
I'm so happy that you pulled me into this collection, Jessica. I was just happy to be part of it. If it didn't work out that I wasn't a part of it, I don't know what I would have done.
And I am really glad that you were available and able to do it because you were like that voice that was missing. Like I did. Okay, so for those of you who are watching and are like, what is this book? What are we talking about here? Black Love Matters, which is behind that shoulder. Right. I used to be a tour guide. I should know opposite shoulders. Real Talk on Romance, Being Seen, and Happily Ever Afters is a collection of essays written by people who have some connection to Blackness and love stories, mostly romance. Some people aren't. For example, like Lori was talking about Deshaun Harrison, who is a very sort of theoretical
Scholar.
thinker on just like the experience of being alive, and their essay is more about like desire and who deserves love and
Mm-hmm.
whether Black love does matter.
Mm-hmm.
And interestingly, their essay is called Black Love Is, Black Loving. Definitely check that out. But most of the essays are centered on either books or film that have love stories in them featuring Black people and end with an HEA, a happily ever after, which is the best kind of story. I'm going to express my bias very thoroughly. I will read stories that don't end satisfactorily, but why?
Yeah. So, and that's a part of the aspect of this that, like I said, has always been interesting for me as someone who writes romance. Is the aspect of what does an HEA mean in terms of Black love? And that's why, for me, it was always this ongoing thing because the HEA in romance, the happily ever after, that ending that romance readers like you and me, Jessica, expect at the end of a romance always seems to be tied to capitalism and some economic expectation, whereby not for devoted readers of Black romances like us, but for a certain segment of the population in Romancelandia of the lighter hue, maybe their beliefs in terms of an HEA featuring Black protagonists seems to be kind of mythical. There's the often said aspect like that the legendary Beverly Jenkins would always say. It seems as if some people in romance could more easily believe in wolves and shapeshifters and aliens falling in love and having an HEA than two Black people.
Mm-hmm.
Which is why I think this is one reason why this collection is so important, because it's saying that, yes, that is possible.
Yep. I was at an in-person thing, which was very strange. After a couple of years, Tucson has a big book festival,
Oh, yes.
and we put one on for the first time in a few years. This past weekend, the weekend before, what is time?
Yeah, it was recently. I think I saw it on TV. I wasn't.
Yeah. and we were talking about that whole thing, and I mentioned Miss Beverly talking about when she was approached by a white reader who said that she didn't know that Black people fell in love the same way as white people do, and the looks on the people in the room who couldn't even imagine hearing someone tell you that. It's just like this is what people tell us, that we don't deserve or expect the same kind of romantic future, present, past that majority culture does all over the world.
Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, I had it happen to me too, girl. Shoot. I had gotten flown down to Dallas to give a class on how to write sweet romance. That's romance without the sexy times, y'all. If you just want to know what that means, is what I do. It was a nice little class, and it was a workshop, and had a good time, and everybody was going out to lunch afterwards. So we went, it wasn't a fancy place. It was just the Fridays down the road. So we went to TGI Friday. I like the little what's it called? The green beans that have a little coating on them. They're very tasty.
Oh yeah, they do some appetizers.
Yeah, the loaded baked potato skins. I'm all for that. So yeah, we're all sitting there chatting, and all of a sudden one lady of the lighter persuasion pops up and says, yeah, it's really interesting in terms of what you do, because I could never imagine that Black people fell in love with a. I'm like, record scratch? Did I just not teach an entire?
Oh gosh.
Had
And
a face and didn't think a thing about that. It's just, I don't know. It's I mean, maybe, what are they looking at exactly? Are they looking at what society is telling them by way of what's going on with Black people, maybe? And maybe that's why we're getting that particular perception that's out there in terms of the media and the culture, and that someone is merely revealing by saying such a thing that she doesn't really interact much with real life Black people, like my parents who were married for 48 years.
We were just magical beings who appeared during the Civil War to make sure that the Union won, disappeared until the Civil Rights Movement. Maybe, there were like 25 of us who appeared as Tuskegee Airmen. And then MLK rose from the ground, from just fully formed, full grown. And then we've been been sexlessly reproducing ever since, except over sexually doing so, because that's all we are now, is a sexualized group of people who don't actually love, we just work. I don't know. So that's the history of America.
Because, and when you're mentioning of that, this also brings to mind in terms of the kind of historical romance that I do and what I wrote about in the book, because that's what the perception is like, from civil rights to Civil War. And I mean, I've even had it. I'm a professor as my day job. I've even had it where even my students have gotten to they'll misspeak Civil War when they mean civil rights. Yeah. But that's why I have a job. Is to be there and say, oh no, dear, that's not what you mean. In terms of during that time period where, yes, Black people most certainly existed, procreated, and for my one series, the Home to Milford College series, created HBCUs that are our legacy. To this day, there's still 100 of them around, and many of them began in that post-Civil War time period and have flourished for more than 100 years. Some flourished, some have been through some hard times, which is part of what my contemporary romance, Sweet Tea, is about. But, for that, in terms of Sweet Tea, it is not a Black romance, because it's one that's put in here for those who are listening. Black romance must have Black protagonists. And my Sweet Tea book has one of the lighter persuasion. That is an interracial romance. Making sure we all understand.
Yeah, and my essay in the book, because I got to do a three-parter. I got to introduce, write an essay, and conclude the book. And mine is about interracial romance, as far as how I love it. I am in one. I love reading about it, but it's the prominent story that's being told in traditionally published romance right now, and we need to talk about that. So that we can talk about later. But you mentioned your Home to Milford College series. Lori mentioned your Great Migration stories. Are you planning on writing more of those?
Well, child. An interesting thing has happened when I sort of went on my little quest to begin publishing Black romance in 2013, 2014, when I couldn't get hardly anyone to look at me and read those things, which is why I had to indie publish, which we also in the collection have a wonderful essay from the estimable Christina Jones that rounds out the collection that talks about the importance of getting these stories out no matter what, even independently. So I was an independently published Black author putting this history out there, that invisible history between Civil War and civil rights for all of those years. And the Milford College series, the migration series focuses on the first part of the 20th century. That's when historians believed, due to a combination of things, that Black folks traveled from the South to the North and to the West. And I wrote those three. I wrote four because it was based on a family of 5 daughters, and 4 of the girls each got their own individual book, and those are available out there on Amazon. And with that publication of those stories, it seemed that the window of those words of what it means, historical romance, got more and more narrow, more and more narrow, to the point where now, it's 2022, it seems to me that historical romance means Regency.
It really, like, even though we
And
can
it started out that
name
way in
people.
2013, I could see it coming. It was like you're standing there and you see the tornado often. Better take shelter. But it's here now. And I think things like Bridgerton assists with that. Like, it's not helping make
not,
the definition of historical romance more broad. Just from a marketing standpoint, or for people who are out there who are aspiring authors, etc. My agent, that's not what she wants from me. She said, if you're interested in doing it, that would be something I would independently publish. And there you go. I have another friend who was her agent kind of similarly told her the same thing. Maybe Victorian, though. We could just open a little bit for Victorian. A little bit, yeah. But so that's my long-winded answer, roundabout way of saying.
Probably not
anytime soon.
Yeah. I totally get that. Although it's kind of, I'm not happy with the market because I understand Bridgerton, wanting, like, being that thing where everybody's watched it and everybody wants to read more stories like it now. But I have been looking for those stories since I started reading romance that aren't set in the Regency. Like, when I started, maybe half of the, like, white romances being published that were historical romances were Regency, and the rest were medieval. There were still, Highlanders or whatever. And then when I came back to it, it seemed like I couldn't find anything that wasn't Regency, that wasn't Beverly Jenkins. Like, it was Regency and Beverly Jenkins, and that was it. And then slowly more people realized that people wanted American West and stuff like that, and people started writing sort of Western style romances. But now, like you said, we're moving back into Regency. Everybody is writing Regency except, a few people who have historically self-published. Like, I keep thinking about Courtney Milan, and she can write what she wants because she has a following that allows her to just self-publish every 4.5 years or whenever her books come.
Or my good friend Joanna Shoup, who does Gilded Age and, was kind of really behind, tweeting and social media and stuff push with the Gilded Age miniseries in the hopes it would blow up quite the same way. But she has been in the trenches with that for a very long time and has a following now. That is a devoted following. But yeah. I mean, she's even written Regency before, and I bet if she said if she said tomorrow she were going to write a Regency, there would be a cry out from the land and joy. If she said she would. But she's been insistent on this Gilded Age thing, and the miniseries came along at just the right time. In terms of, like I'm saying, I'm hoping that she'll be able to capitalize on that. But trust and believe, if she said she would go back to Regency tomorrow,
people would be on it.
Yeah.
So what I'm hearing, viewers, is that Miss Piper needs a following. I mean, she has a following, but she needs a bigger following so that she can offer up some alternate time periods. Because I don't know how we've read 10,000 books set in the same 13 years. Like the Regency period is from what? 1803 or 1799 to 1813 or something like that.
They do what they call with academia we call the long period. They try to like reach outside of what the actual Regency time period is. Like you're right, it's this 10-year time period, and now they got the long Regency like going to like 1803 to 1840s or something like that. When it's like more 1820 to 1830, in terms of that. So
let us have trains. Just let us have trains.
I used to have a love for these books, but the obsession killed it.
Yeah, I mean, I still read Regency. I have like 25. You can't see, but behind me is my is mostly books I'm going to read shelf, and
I see Sweet Tea up there though.
There's so. Well,
I see the little. I see the little spine. I see it. Yep, I see my spine.
This is my like recent books by Black people that
I recognize my spine. There it is. There's my baby. Oh, hey baby. But yeah, and that we're not leaving out people in terms of contemporary or whatever. It's just in terms of talking about what's happened to historical. And everybody, like I remember when I first started publishing in 2013, it was like, oh, it's gonna be back. It's gonna be back. Don't worry about it. It's gonna be back. And then it's like it just so it's Regency and Miss Joanna Shoup.
And speaking of Sweet Tea and contemporaries, like contemporary romance has always been a thing, but I feel like that's all it is right now. Like we're getting plenty, like especially in mass market, we're getting plenty of our continued Regencies and historical stuff that's been always in that's always going to have a market for it. But I don't know if it's just the pandemic, but I have been reading personally almost all contemporaries, and I don't know if that's because that's all I can read. Like even like reading historical requires like world building that your brain has to do.
True.
But it seems like because people are reading more contemporaries, there are more contemporaries coming out every month, and the market is getting bigger and bigger, which is great for those of us who love stories, but also terrible for those of us who can't read fast.
Yeah, and that's the thing in terms of I don't know if you saw when it was on Twitter, was it Barnes and Noble that did some kind of bracket in terms of, and then Joanna was the one to be like, there's a few things missing from this bracket, and it was like any kind of historical romance. I mean, they had like it was crazy how they had on there the Shining Through, which is like a woman's fiction from the 80s, and then they had
Jane Eyre.
Pride and Prejudice, which is not really a historical romance, because it was contemporary to Jane Austen's time. It's not. So it was like historical romance. So I don't know. Maybe the person who made it up felt as we did, that this was the historical romance in there. forget that. I'm just gonna write all the contemporaries in these brackets, and y'all gonna deal with that. Joanna was not happy.
I'm sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So speaking of, I don't know what I'm speaking of, but back to Black Love Matters. I don't know. We've been having a really great conversation, but it's something that as a person who has written historical and contemporary and outside of the romance genre and is an academic outside of the romance genre, and you write about in your essay about perspective and especially like the Black man.
Yeah.
What? So I can't remember. It might have been another one of these where Ms. Bev was talking about the erasure of the Black man, and Christina in her indie essay talks about the erasure of Black love in general. How do you think that can change? Like, I don't know how. Like, we all talk about how we've seen things and what we see and what we don't see, but then, as I mentioned before, like interracial romance, especially in contemporary traditionally published books, is like the norm now. Unless and then there's like Harlequin, which is great but very ephemeral because they publish like 200 copies of them and then don't publish them anymore. I swear I had a question when I started this, but if you
well, what I think your question was, I can just divine it from you across from the A's, Arizona to Atlanta. In terms of one of the things that's key about this is reinforcing the role that Black masculinity plays. If you are what you're talking about is the heterosexual romance in terms of Black love, that a key part of that economic piece has to do with that Black male hero. What is he doing? Will it be enough to provide for this heroine for beyond their HEA? It's like there's the HEA, which is the last page of the book, which in terms of me who writes the squeaky stuff, I don't say clean because nothing's wrong with sex. That is just saying sexy times. That there's a kiss, there's a finale. But readers have in their mind that beyond that, again, that's what I'm saying in terms of this economic part that plays a role. It comes to mind in two ways. There's one way whereby The Princess and the Frog gets a lot of critique. I think particularly from Black women is where I see this happening, mostly in social media, about how that really was not a happy ending. When you have what's her name, Little Princess and Tiana getting her restaurant, that everybody's supposed to be like, yay, that's it. And the prince dude is supposed to, because he's been spoiled all during the movie. He don't know how to do a thing on his own. But now at the end, he's supposed to stop being spoiled, roll up his sleeves, and get to work in her restaurant and help her out. And a lot of people are like, I don't see that happening. They see happening instead with Tiana is that she is going to be doing a lot of work. That is not happy for her. Now, I know the prince, he's not Black or whatever, but I'm just saying, this is part of the point in terms of people saying Black romance is a thing. It has to do with, I think they're over concerned about, can Prince Charming be Black? Right? Well, of course he can, right? It's my daddy, oh, he's my husband, right? He exists. But in terms of what we see in the culture regards to Black males plays a role, and that's a large part of what my essay was about. And the second thing I was going to say that was reinforced about that, I'm reading an advanced reading copy, an ARC, as we call it, of Token Black Girl, which is a memoir that's coming out in October. This woman talks about how sheltered she was as a token Black girl. She was one of those, the old people would say, a speck of pepper and a sea of salt in terms of her life, right? So her parents were Black, but they lived in a white neighborhood. She attended white schools. She didn't really know or understand Blackness as part of the, does that have something to do with me? I don't know what y'all talking about or whatever. No. She said she was walking with her mother someplace down the street and saw a Black man. She said she was 12 or something like that. Saw a Black man out in public and pointed to him and said, "Thug." Now, this is a young Black girl. I think the way she's writing, she was just sometime in the late 90s, early 2000s. I think it was when our dudes started going around with their pants kind of low and stuff. And pointed to this Black man and said, "That's a thug."
And this is what majority culture teaches.
That's what majority culture taught her as a young girl, is to see Black men. And she had her daddy at home. She had a grandfather. And it didn't matter, because what the white supremacist patriarchy culture taught her is that Black men are thugs. And this is one of the reasons why Black love matters in terms of the collection and the various perspectives that are shown in the book in terms of demolishing that kind of thoughts and expectations. We gotta have it. Gotta stand up for it, and say it's wrong. And this part when she's writing in her book is to say, this is how deeply ingrained these views are. Is that her mother was just. She said her mother was just stunned and had to take her to the side and give her a good talking to. And also, I guess, wonder, she's just talking about from that, like, her parents started scurrying around trying to give them, like, Black History. her sister, they started taking her to all these places and trying to get the art in, the culture, going to festivals and whatnot. But it was too late. It was too late at 12 for her to try to get it, for her and her slightly younger sister, who was like 10 or something like that. And so it was a later thing, I think, which happens, that it was a later thing she had to go back and get in order to be able to see the culture anew, to see the culture through our lens as opposed to their lens, which I think is a very key thing also in terms of Black romance and Black historical romance. To say, the thing that I had always thought in terms of writing my stories, especially when I would say to people, "Oh, it's historical, it's post-Civil War, it's during Reconstruction period, or it's during the first part of the 20th century," which people begin to know that's synonymous with Jim Crow, and I'm out. Forget that. That's what they have taught us, right, in terms of the lessons of history and what we're going through as part of these history wars, or some people might think about it in terms of CRT. I like they kept throwing that the acronym out at Ketanji Jackson during her hearing. Y'all don't know what you're talking about. Shut up. CRT. Which means what? You don't want us to have a complete and full narrative of the history. You just would rather us have this little narrow I call it more indoctrination than education. Right? Isn't that what that poor 12-year-old girl had been in her education, her predominantly white school? She had been indoctrinated to understand just how supreme white supremacy was. That she couldn't even look at a black man and not call him thug out loud, right? That this, instead of having this full and complete story, and that my stories were about restoring this aspect. Yes, the 1890s were hideous times when Plessy versus Ferguson happened, right? Hideous time to be a Black person. How did the ancestors survive? How did they get through that? What were they doing? People have been taught, oh, they laid down somewhere and didn't do nothing and just no, that's not what they were doing. They were always resisting, always doing things to reconfirm their humanity, whether it was through their church, in terms of leadership positions that they had, organizing in terms of education, and hoping and saving for a better day. This is when you get all of these HBCUs not just popping up, but being supported by these institutions. So to me, it's like, it's time to look at it through our lens. What were we doing instead of what were they doing to us?
And meanwhile, we were living the lives that we could manage. And regardless,
and loving one another, or else we would not be here.
Right? Like, keep it going forward instead of regardless of what was happening outside of our communities, we were keeping going.
Yep.
Building our own community so that we have that place to love and live a life that had any kind of HEA, romantic, economic, whatever. Of course, the economic one was often taken from us, and we had to build it up again.
But we were doing the thing in terms of everyday life, which I think is the lessons that they have to teach us now, right? This is a lesson that they have to teach us. This is what the ancestors have to say to us in terms of looking around saying, well, is this not a hot mess? Especially with, like, if you're watching the confirmation hearings, or what I saw a lot of on social media, people not wanting to watch the confirmation hearings, right? Knowing that this is a historical moment, that this Black woman was getting on the Supreme Court, but not wanting to see the foolishness that was happening with people bringing up stuff that has nothing to do with her or the Supreme Court. But some other people saying, look at her enduring. Look at her standing in the face of that. And that's why I was very happy at the moment yesterday when Cory Booker came in and gave her that open support. We supported each other. And that's what the ancestors have to teach us. I think in terms of Black Love Matters, which is why I look back and I'm writing stories about those people in that particular time period. And I know that other people are afraid to look. But I think in terms of looking and investing in them and what they did, it helps me at least do what I need to do to keep on going.
Absolutely, because Black love matters, and especially going back to like my very fantastical concept of Black people's existence in America, pop up at the Civil War and then disappear again for another 100 years. Like, remembering that there were people, because obviously, like, film and classical fiction and a lot of stuff, especially depicting the 20th century, until we get to World War II, and even when we get to World War II, only if we're talking about the Tuskegee Airmen or the cook on the USS Arizona, or like those individual people who had to excel to far greater heights than the average person whose story is told about that time period. We don't get just Black stories of existence and love and relationships.
Yeah.
And so the current view of a Black relationship is either through celebrities
Mhm.
or kind of this lens that you talk about being drawn of dysfunction,
Yeah.
of the welfare queen and her 12 children and male thugs, and that's it. That's
Yeah.
all of it. So, and I know, like, some of that is changing in representation in the more marketed fiction in film and all of that stuff. But there are still some concepts that were born into, like, I'm in my mid-30s, and the stuff that was drilled into me in the 90s and early 2000s still kind of has a hold on me as far as some things goes. And there are some people who that's where their education ended, and that's all
Yeah.
that they know of, and that's all that they're going to think of. So,
Yep.
um,
That's why
it's
that indoctrinated historical narrative is so deep in the American culture, because you're right. There are a lot of people who, like, they stop at that. They don't know nothing else. They don't want to know nothing else. It's just like, I learned that in school. I learned this history in school. Now you up here telling me there's all of this. Now I want to hear about all this. This is what I was taught.
Mhm. And when it comes to going beyond heteronormative,
Yeah.
able-bodied,
Mm-hmm.
standard size, all of that stuff, we have to go even further to think about who's represented in all of that, and how we're telling those stories in romance, because we've been talking a lot over at Book Riot about how there have been so many more stories of, like, fat women finding
Mm-hmm.
love.
Mm-hmm.
But even then, it's almost always women. There is such a small percentage of anyone who's not a woman who isn't, 6'4", always 6'4", with firm abs, even if they work an office job, and um, broad shoulders, and not a single ounce of fat on them. And it's, of course, it's the ideal for some people, and it's something that's been carried over for decades and decades in romance writing. But as we see more people's stories being told, how, like, that erasure of all Black love, like, it's one of the reasons that I wanted to make sure that it wasn't just um, a single couple on the cover of our book. Like, uh, I it doesn't cover everyone, but I wanted it just to make sure that um, it wasn't just a single concept of straight Black love, that
Yeah.
all Black love,
Mm-hmm.
and for all Black people was important. But do you have any thoughts about that? I know I keep offering up questions that end up not being questions. I'm sorry.
No, that's true. And one of the things that occurred to me, I was like flipping through the channels the other day and watching the Nutty Professor. And remember how there was, like, in that movie, in the first, like, both the second, the Nutty Professor, not the Jerry Lewis one, but the ones with Eddie Murphy's in it, where he was, this fat dude. Well, you're right. It's like, that doesn't exist. And my husband's kind of big. We've been married 23 years, going on 24 years. It's a very interesting aspect in terms of how little you see that. So, and I know that I am working on a story in terms of another potential Hallmark story with at HBCU with fat representation. But yeah, maybe shoot, I should write one with him being that too. Being fat
There
too.
you go.
Yeah. There's some questions in our little chat. in
Yeah,
terms
and
of
I
this.
know like Rebecca Weatherspoon has, unfortunately, it's currently only available through Audible, but just seeing the cover of a fat couple, like both of them were not standard size,
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
and
Yes.
I cannot remember the name of it now. I can see the cover though. There's a dog.
Which is good because editors like dogs.
Yeah.
So we started the intersections of identities: being a fat Black woman, being a disabled Black woman who used assistance devices. My mother was a disabled Black woman. She found love. Being a low income person. I don't see low income, see romance.
We're seeing a little bit more,
A
but
little bit. Is it
not
contemporary?
very much.
Have you seen
I
contemporary?
didn't like. Now, of course, I'm like, oh yeah, that's totally a thing, and I cannot think of a single book in, like, so in contemporary, low income is kind of
Child.
it's not the most it's a squishy term, right? Because
Yeah.
there's some people who are like, they don't make a lot of money, but they have full-time jobs, they have housing security.
But are they, if it's heterosexual, then it's usually the female.
Yeah.
You know
Yeah.
what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I'm sorry
Yeah,
about the
so
low income, y'all. See, like,
that is definitely something that I would want to see
this
more
is what I'm
of.
saying. Yeah.
And like,
They don't care.
what's her name? Mia
Mia Sosa.
Sosa has, although they're not well off and there's financial insecurity, but it's mostly because of owning your own business. So I don't even know if
Owning your own
that's,
business is like the American dream to getting rich.
yeah,
You know what I'm saying?
yeah.
It
So
is like,
financial,
I'm trying to think. Ooh, yeah. So yeah, speaking to that, and I just said I don't know if there are any particular essays in the collection that deal with that, but in terms of the disabled Black woman who uses assisted devices and all that, I think there's so much room out there for more. My mother didn't use an assistive device; she had polio when she was a child, and so her arm was kind of, something that she had to, re-engineer into using in a certain way that was atypical. But we need more of those. I agree.
yeah.
Oh, I just remember, was it like 2015ish or something like that when Harlequin published a book that was this huge deal because the heroine was in a wheelchair, and this, of course, was a white story. We don't have enough of those for us, so we do need more.
Alyssa Cole's
She did
novella.
Have one. Right. That's right. She did have one.
Now it's the novella in the Reluctant Royal series that is not Once Ghosted Twice Shy, and I can see the cover, but I cannot remember the title. But that's like the one book that my brain goes to when I think of Black woman in a wheelchair.
Yeah.
Who uses a wheelchair,
that's
and
true.
it's written
That's
very
true.
well.
And knowing Alyssa, I bet you she did that on purpose.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And
if you,
it was saying Black people be involved in drama and romance. My friend Jamie Wesley, Fake It Till You Bake It, June 21st, go get it. Run, don't walk.
I'm so excited for that book.
Yes. She is the rom-com queen. She is going to be huge. Y'all better support. Absolutely. That is my suggestion. And Black, and in terms of Black people, her thing has always been, even from the beginning, we met each other in a pitch contest on one of the Harlequin websites about 12 years ago. She's like, if we don't write it, who is going
Right.
to write it? All her stuff is blackity black. So Jamie Wesley, go get it. She got all kinds of backlists too.
I
So, and
remember
she's very
reading.
stern about the whole definition of rom-com. Makes her cranky. Like, y'all
What
ain't
is
writing no
Jamie
rom-coms out here.
Tell Me Something Real was my first Jamie Wesley, and it was
Mm-hmm,
hilarious.
mm-hmm,
So
mm-hmm.
good.
Yes.
And just before I go on with more rom-coms, if you're curious about what we were talking about with various intersections, Deshaun Harrison's essay in the book is very deeply involved in who deserves love and desire and who is desired in humanity, but it ends kind of on a sad note. So then maybe read Katrina Jackson and Kasoko Jackson's essays about being queer and finding themselves or making their own stories. And to link this to the question about rom-coms, Christina C. Jones, um, as Piper mentioned earlier, has a great essay about indie romance, and she writes some really serious traumatic stuff, but also her Love Sisters trilogy is the some of the funniest contemporary romantic fiction that I've read in a while. Like, just hilarious. So I would definitely check her out both in the book and outside of it.
Good support. Yes. Favorite authors right now with respect to romance? Any good authors you would recommend doing the work with Black and brown characters? We'll be just saying.
all of those.
All of those. To that, I would add, if people don't know, my other author friends I like to lift up at this time, Farrah Rashawn, Cam Jackson, Cericia Glass wrote a cosplay, it's interracial, but it's cosplay with fat representation that kind of got swept under the rug around December because it's Christmas time and people was out shopping and not reading. Who else? Sanithia Williams.
Yeah.
Sharon C. Cooper, Honey Child. Her book is coming out next month in April. You have got to get that book. I was there at the birthing of that idea of the young woman who wins the lottery. And her book is I can't think of the title right now. But Sharon C. Cooper, go get it. She's amazing. Sharon writes romantic suspense. She writes contemporary romance. And in terms of romantic suspense, there are not a lot of us. There are not nearly enough of us writing romantic suspense. I wish there were more. It's like my I hate to say guilty pleasure because it ain't nothing guilty about it. But romantic suspense with Black people in it, there's not enough of it. So whatever I see it, I just gobble it up. And Sharon is wonderful at that. So as well as the contemporaries and sort of the legal eagerly kind of side of romance. She also has a series. Maybe this is more in terms of income type stuff. She has a working class series, the Jenkins family. I believe that they're in the construction business. Yeah. And we talked about, her impetus in terms of writing that, and that was one of the reasons why show working class side that Sharon has.
Yeah, and I read one of her books. I swear I don't remember the name of any book at all in existence.
What's wrong with us?
It's one of the ones with an older couple, and that's another thing that we talk about.
Seasoned romance.
Yes, and
seasoned Black romance. Yes, indeed.
Like, she has a lot of money from her divorce, but he's like the building super. So like there's discrepancies, but rarely instances that I can think of where everyone is of a lower income, which really, like you said, we should really see more of those, because not, people who are in poverty deserve their stories to be uplifted too.
Yeah.
and romance and love and all of that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I was going to mention Adriana Herrera, who is one of the contributors
Yes.
to the book. She has a book coming out in the spring. It's not
Caribbean
indie.
Harris.
A Caribbean heiress in Paris.
Yes.
The first in a series about
We got one. Yay.
Dominican heiresses with money who get to fall
In
in love.
historical times. That is
Yes.
not Regency. Please support it.
Yes. Yes.
We want
Not
other books
Regency.
besides the Regency period. That's all we want.
There are trains in this book. I don't know what it is with my obsession with trains, but I love people being able to get places.
That's what it is. To get places relatively quickly and not to be in some carriage sitting on top of one another smelling for days. Yeah, no. I see what you mean. Yeah, it's the last question is saying what makes you excited. That makes me excited that she did that work. She's
Yes.
awesome.
I am also really excited with what Karina Adores is doing. Karina Adores is an imprint of an imprint. Karina Press is part of Harlequin Romance, and they've been doing a lot of the other stuff that Harlequin hasn't been doing with queer characters and more characters of color. And Karina Adores is specifically focused on queer characters,
Which
and
should
they've
not
put
be,
out
but it's
right.
you know.
Yeah, you would think, and they've put out 2 books recently. If You Love Something, which is about slightly older Black men, by Jace Ellis, and Deshaun and Chris Plan a Wedding by Chancey C. Higgins.
Yes, I did see that.
Those 2 books have me excited for the future of all romance. Like, I want more romance like both of those.
Given unlimited budget for a Hallmark romance-esque movie, what is your first order of business? This can be your cast, the plot, place, anything.
Sweet.
Well, as a Hallmark author of sweet tea, that is where you notice the little gold foil end in the corner. I cannot say anything yet, but all I can say is
I'll take that way.
Keep a close eye on the channel this time next year.
Y'all heard it here.
So he says we got the 3 to 5 minute warning. This is when we're wrapping up our stuff in terms of what we're doing, or I guess it's this point when I get to say more about my Anne Lowe book. People are interested.
Yes.
It's not a romance. Let me just say that right up front. Which is one of the reasons.
It's a story that needs to be told.
It's a story that needs to be told. It's a Hidden Figures story. Anne Lowe, people who don't know, was a fashion designer. Yes, there were Black fashion designers in the first part of the 20th century. They didn't just pop up in the 80s. Anne Lowe designed for women of the social register. That means all the wealthy white women, the Vanderbilts, the Rockefellers, Marjorie Merriweather Post of your Post cereal family, honey, all of them designed clothes for those women. And she is best known for designing the wedding gown, one of the most famous wedding gowns ever to be photographed, that of Jackie Kennedy. So if you Google Jackie Kennedy's first wedding gown, and you see it, she made all of that out of 50 yards of fabric, and she made it twice for reasons that are revealed in the story of Anne Lowe. So one of those things in terms of, again, looking at someone, her life's journey, what she went through, how she came from Clayton, Alabama, couldn't be no more rural, in 1898, all the way to high society. That's what my book, By Her Own Design, is about, and it will be out June 7th. Lots of places. The airport, even, I was told.
That's exciting.
Yes.
So yes. Pre-order, buy her own design.
Pre-order, and hopefully, as I said, Lori was saying, hopefully they'll have me back for Busboys and Poets to tell you more about it.
That's
There she
you to jump in and say we will have you back.
Thank you, Lori.
I loved the little wink, wink. Why do you think I added that question in there for you?
Oh, you put that in there?
Mm-hmm. Don't you
You're
worry.
awesome. Thank you.
Before we leave for the night, y'all, you can go ahead and get your copy of Black Love Matters. You can actually order it if you want to pick up or do to-go delivery, what have you, with Busboys. It is one of our books offered on Books to Go. And in case you wanted a signed copy, we also have those. Go ahead and go onto the Eventbrite page where you originally signed up, and you can go ahead and order your own copy with shipping anywhere in the United States until about 11 p.m. Eastern tonight. So you have time. You have time. You want to get you, friends, your mama-in-law, your neighbor, like this book. And thank you both so much for being here. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for having us, Lori. We
Yes,
appreciate
thank
it.
you.
Black love matters.
Black Love Matters. Although, as we know, Deshaun's got some things to say about it. But
I can point.
Yes, you can point.
There we go.
A lot to say about a lot of things, just like the other authors in here. So thank you all so much. And we're going to go ahead and say good night.
Have a good evening, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Love from all of us here at Busboys and Poets Books. We hope you stay safe and well, and we hope to see you soon. And to stay and broadcast.